This is the Try Swim Coach podcast, where the most difficult leg of the triathlon becomes your friend, leaving your struggles and your competition behind you. TrySwimCoach.com, helping you to laugh at the water.
Welcome to Try Swim Coach. This is Kevin, and this is episode number 98. And I'm really excited today to have Chris Ritter on the show from Ritter Sports Performance. And we're going to get into a lot of deep topics on training. And Chris has over a decade of experience successfully coaching a diverse population of athletes and clientele. All ages and abilities have seen results with Chris, from youth to beginners, masters athletes, even Olympic gold medalists. He is always learning and refining the Ritter SP training methods, and his professional and academic credentials include a degree in exercise science and kinesiology, CSCS, NASM, USAW, and IYCA-YFS. And his website is rittersp.com. Chris, welcome to Try Swim Coach.
Thanks, Kevin. That intro sounds really impressive now.
Yeah, you've got a lot of letters, so I'm sure that's meaningful. I know some of those degrees, actually. I used to be a personal trainer, so I know NASM pretty well, and that is some really, really interesting stuff, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what is your background? I'm curious what your childhood was like, how you got interested in sports performance, and what led you to, kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, I think growing up, swimming was kind of always the sport I seemed to revolve around the most. Growing up doing summer leagues, and then eventually got a little bit more serious and joined a year-round club probably around high school or middle school age, and did that pretty seriously, and lived in a small town out in Oregon. And I'd swim, hour and a half, 2 hour morning practices, go to school, come home, do a swim in the afternoon for club, and then eat a energy bar, and then jump right in for high school practice during high school season and swim another hour and a half or so. And so sometimes I was in the pool a lot of hours. It seems crazy looking back. I was like, man, I was young, had a lot of energy back then.
Yeah.
But then not doing that these days. But then swam in college down in Cal State Bakersfield in California, and done a few Olympic distance triathlons in the meantime as well, post-swimming career. And I think it was around probably the second year of college, I just knew I wanted to coach people and help people with their goals. And that's where it kind of started to intersect where I got into the personal training side, because I thought, well, that'd be a good way to help coach. And I always felt like swimming was a little bit behind in terms of how we can make you a better athlete and get you better. And so I started coaching swim clubs as well as personal training, and then somehow just kind of started blending the two just over time. More and more that I would dive into strength and conditioning and how they make athletes better no matter what their sport. And I could see a lot of holes in the swimming world when it came to that. And so I started to just put the two together where I saw you could.
Awesome. Now, it's funny, I didn't know that you went to Bakersfield. I went to UC Davis, and back when I was in school, that was our biggest rival, was Bakersfield. And I don't know I'm not sure who your coach was, but it was Ernie McGlisco was the coach back in the 90s when I was in college, and they had some amazing teams there, and we just hated you guys.
Ernie was awesome. Ernie was like the godfather of the university, and his book Swimming Fastest, is just enormous. But I got to meet him. He came back for alumni, but Bob Steele was the coach when I was there.
Right.
And the last year I swam there was Bob's last year, and that was pretty close to when Bakersfield switched from Division II to Division I now. But yeah, at the time, it was the most winning program in Division II history. I think it was 13 or 14 national titles, just crazy fast swimming. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was the only swim meet I've ever been to, like college-wise, where there was the local news was actually covering our meet, our dual meet against Bakersfield. We walked in there and there was like cameras going in, and we were just kind of like, whoa, this is like big time. And,
it was awesome.
Yeah, what was your events, or what were your events there? Yeah,
so my dual meet lineup was the mile, 500, 400 IM. Every dual meet.
The easy stuff, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Not just dip your toe in a little bit and just swim around. But
wow.
I swam far because I couldn't swim very fast, so I made up for it with the laps.
Yeah, that's right. So that's awesome. So let's talk about your experience with working with the 2-time Olympic gold medalist Cullen Jones. I think that sounds like a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, so coming out of college, I knew I wanted to kind of get more into elite level swimming. And through the connection of the head coach at the time there, he knew David Marsh, who had just moved to Charlotte and was starting, this kind of different thing where pros are going to come and train together, because before it'd been in colleges and stuff like that, really not a separate thing. And so I flew out here and said, hey, I want to work with you guys and help with the swimmers specific with the strength training. And so at the time, it was about 13 or so that we started with. And Cullen came in a little later into the process there when we were training for Beijing in 2008. And it was probably only 4 or 5 months before trials that he showed up. He was previously working up at his college at NC State. And so he came down, and that was just a really interesting dynamic and just an awesome year to be a part of, partly because I was the same age, if not younger than half that group, and nowhere close to any of their level of swimming, right? And Cullen's actually just a month younger than me. And so he comes in, he had broken, I think, a world record at the time, and, really was obviously trying to make the team. And so that was really interesting for me to have to learn, you got to be egoless as a strength coach, especially because just because you want to do something, but if it doesn't jive with the athlete, you have to make sure that you're following what they feel comfortable with, but what's also going to get results. And he had come in with, some nagging injuries and some stuff wasn't working with him. And so we had a couple talks like, okay, hey, here's the plan. Here's what I think we could do. And just a mutual agreement of like, hey, I think this is what we're going to do and going forward. And I think that's a lot of difference in terms of maybe college and especially club levels, or even, sometimes triathlon coaches where it's kind of there where the highway and this is, it's not moldable. And I think that you got to be able to do that as a coach and change things like that. But yeah, he just had, I remember one exercise we did where I was holding a band and he would do just a couple real quick movements. And I've never felt as much power as I did in those few reps. The first time we did, I was like, whoa, okay, this is something different. Normal athletes don't put out that kind of power. But we played a lot around with incorporating, strength training a little bit differently than he had previously. And he actually had his best in-season time at the time when we did a short workout about 10 minutes long, probably about 10 minutes before he swam the 50 free in season. So we went to the weight room. It was a home meet in Charlotte. Went to the weight room, did a quick 10-minute session, and then he got out on the blocks 10 minutes later, swam his best in-season time. So I started to learn, like, how can we incorporate this strength conditioning to actually get performance in the pool?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that it's pretty well known that with sprint events in swimming that you kind of absolutely need to do strength training. But what's interesting in what you're doing, we'll talk about this in a little bit, is the distance swimming and how it can really benefit triathletes and distance swimmers in their events. And so what are your thoughts? I mean, you have a lot of different kinds of things that you do, and this is kind of an open-ended question, but what are your thoughts on strength training for distance swimmers and triathletes?
I think first you have to realize, even if it's a distance event, it used to be referred to as a strength endurance event. And then we somehow dropped the strength over time, and it is now, often referred to as just an endurance event. Well, what's in it? It's an endurance of your strength. So if you don't have a lot of strength, your ceiling for endurance capabilities is always going to be limited. I was actually just working with a triathlete today coming in for an assessment, and I was talking to her about, hey, you are super weak, and so you can go out there and train as hard as you want, but if you don't have a prerequisite level of strength, you're always going to be limited by that. And so you want to think about strength as kind of the foundation for all your other training capabilities that you're going to train, whether that's power or whether that's endurance. So I think as much as people want to put strength training as vital for sprinters, I think it's just as vital for distance swimmers. And you think even more, the pounding that you're putting on your body as a distance swimmer or as a triathlete putting in the yardage, having your body have armor and being able to withstand the training and the reps that you're putting it through, I think that's just as important as some of the gains that sprinters see.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And so you're seeing now in triathlon, is that sort of changing a little bit? Like, I think that triathletes have traditionally kind of ignored weightlifting or strength training altogether. Is that something that you see is sort of changing now?
Yeah, I think they're opening their eyes. And honestly, I think it just takes, a season of doing things a little bit differently than probably they've done before. And so often I think people have the misconception of, if I do weights, I'm going to automatically get big, right? And obviously triathletes don't want that. And what I say to that first off is, if it was as easy as looking at a weight and getting bigger, do you think the supplement industries would be doing as well as they are? And so that's why it's hard to gain muscle. It's hard to get bigger. And the amount of volume of training that you put in as a triathlete is always going to negate those factors of just always bulking up. So right. I want to get strength trained so that you can actually become more durable. And then what we talked about, getting stronger so you can increase your endurance capabilities. So it's that the difference between gaining strength structurally or neurologically. And people don't think about we can gain strength neurologically by just the brain communicating better with the muscles. And you can only do that through strength training.
Yeah. So what kinds of strength training are you referring to? I mean, I like to do the elastic tubing. I mean, not myself, but I teach people how to use the elastic tubing because freestyle, that obviously emulates kind of your stroke. And then I like a lot of body weight exercises, and there's some other things I like to do in the gym. But what is your take on kind of how you break it up?
Yeah, well, with swimming specifically, I think that if you are trying to mimic the swimming, that's good in terms of like changing technique on land, like getting in a band and kind of feeling your catch. I think that's great stuff in terms of being able to feel that outside the water because it's different, sensory, and you can kind of, maybe sometimes it clicks like, oh, hey, yeah, I can feel that. And now in the water, and you put that different catch into a position. But I think on land, you should try to just get as strong as you can. And then when you hop in the water, try to actually put it into practice. I think sometimes people get down this rabbit hole of like trying to absolutely simulate swimming on land when I think it's best simulated in the water. Sometimes on land it's good to, set up some bands and try to hold that catch. But I think for the most part on land, you want to get strong. And then when you get in the water, that's when you want to get fast. And when you start to mix those two around, sometimes you can get results, but I think that's where it starts to get a little confusing for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So for triathletes in general, I know there's it's probably you're going to say it's specific to the individual, but in general, what are the types of exercises that you have people doing?
Yeah, so a balance program in my mind consists of 4 different movements. So pushing, pulling for upper body, and then hinging and squatting for the lower body. And especially for swimmers and triathletes too, you want to make sure you're always pulling a little bit more than you're pushing. So if you have a push-up and a pull-up in your workout, that's good because that's balance. That's 1-to-1. If you started doing push-up and overhead press, well, now you're getting 2 pushes versus 1 pulling, and that's where you start to get down the path of maybe getting some shoulder injuries down the road. A lot of times when swimmers or triathletes come to me with shoulder stuff, all I do is I just push the ratios toward more pulling exercises, and shoulder stuff just magically starts to go away. Over time, it just starts to dissipate. With the lower body, you want to make sure you're having Romanian deadlifts or where the legs are just slightly bent and you're much more from a hinge movement as much as you're doing squatting, whether it's single leg or double leg. And there are variations of all those movements, but within those 4 categories, you just want to stay as balanced as you can with ratios. And the exercises then are endless within those categories. But whenever you're thinking about, is my program balanced? Think that way. Am I pushing as much as I'm pulling? And if anything, I should be pulling a little bit more. And am I squatting as much as I'm hinging? And if anything, you should be hinging a little bit more. And what you get is working the back side of the body a little bit more than the front side. And I'm not sure if it's because mirrors are in the gym and we always like to work the muscles that we can see a little bit more, but people tend to work a little bit more pushing and squatting, and it tends to get the knees and the shoulders a little bit more inflamed and leaves the hips vulnerable and weak as opposed to working the back side of the body more.
I'm not familiar with hinging. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so if you think about hinge, just knees soft, right? So don't lock out the knees, but knees are soft. And just bending forward at the waist as far as you can, keeping an engaged back. And that's the key. So if we just had dumbbells at our side, we've turned that into a dumbbell deadlift. And so as long as your back's staying engaged, and this is actually a great way I found for guys in particular to get better flexibility in their hamstrings. Because you got to ask, why are the hamstrings tight in the first place? And, yanking on them probably isn't the best way to get them more flexible. They're tight for a reason. And most of the time, it's because they're weak or there's some compensation in your core or low back that they're trying to help. So if we just put dumbbells at our side and just hinged forward, again, back staying tight and engaged, over time, the hamstrings are going to actually loosen up because they're thinking, hey, I'm getting stronger. This is a safe position, and I can actually release a little bit more. And that has by far been the most successful way I've found to get guys in particular hamstrings length back to where it should optimally be. And I've taken a lot of guys from, just barely hinging forward at all until they lose that back position, until, they're picking their body weight off the ground, no problem. So the hinge, and I'm glad you asked that question because I think so many people just skip the hinge altogether and they think, oh, well, I just got to do squat for lower body. And that's where you get off balance and it just doesn't work out in the long run.
Yeah, that's right. That's awesome stuff. And now you have a book that you talk about some of this stuff in. Are those exercises all in the book?
Yeah, so the Surge Strength is basically kind of a breakdown of how strength training in particular for swimmers can really help. And I break all those categories down and I talk about those. And then the exercise library is on my site and that's free for anybody to check out. I think at this point we have almost 500 exercise videos up there and all with coaching cues and all that stuff. So if you want to check out, hey, how do you do actually a deadlift with dumbbells at your side? You can go on the exercise library and watch that and see all the cues and make sure you're doing it right. So yeah, all that stuff's available.
Cool. I'll put all that in the show notes as well for people to check out. And I'm definitely going to be doing some of this. So my particular interest in the injury prevention stuff is the shoulders, because I've had my share of shoulder injuries and shoulder pain and all that. Can you talk a little bit more about shoulders and what causes the injury? And then you said sometimes it's a simple fix. What else do you have for fixing kind of typical shoulder problems?
Yeah, so first off, when we do an assessment, whether it's a client online or in person, we always do the same assessment, and it's making sure that you can get as close as you can if you took your right hand behind your back and your left hand over top, and how close can those fists get to touching? Mm-hmm. And then you go to the other side. And so it's taken right out of the FMS, if you guys are familiar with that. And so what you want to do, if you're more than a fist apart, we got to work on that and getting that a little bit closer together. So working on the shoulder mobility. Most of the time, issue first, you just don't have good movement through your shoulder. And so you have to work on that. And it could be a couple different stretches we could do, whether it's your chest that's too tight, or sometimes it's your lat that's too tight, especially if you're putting a lot of miles in the pool. You can't discount that, that rotational torque from the pulling, it can really get your shoulder out of place. And oftentimes, swimmers can develop that swimmer shoulder with tendonitis and stuff like that. So movement has to be there first. If your movement is good and you're still having shoulder problems, it's probably because it's just plain too weak. And then that's where you start working on, okay, I actually want to be able to press some weight overhead. Or even a simpler version of that is a waiter carry. So if you take a dumbbell or a kettlebell, hold it in one hand, hold it directly overhead, making sure your back isn't arching out, and just slowly walk about 20 yards or so, turn around and come back. And what's happening is you're not having to actively press the weight up, but all those stabilizer muscles around your shoulder are having to fire like crazy to keep that weight balanced overhead. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really good way to just slowly start to build up that shoulder without having to put the stress of actually pushing it up and down. Right. And especially if it's out of position, that's the last thing you want to do. If it's in a bad position, the last thing I want to do is try to strengthen it. I want to get it moving well first. So you want to think, is it a movement problem or is it a strength problem? And that's where, we always start when we're going through the assessments and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That sounds like awesome stuff. Now, what about the idea of sitting? I've had some issues with that. I know a lot of people have back problems and neck problems and things like that. I think for me, it's my shoulders, because when I sit, I tend to sort of lean forward. That kind of position is sort of what makes things worse. And then I go to do a workout, and it's like my body has to kind of readjust all around. So what are your thoughts on the whole sitting thing?
Yeah, I think the phrase going around is sitting's the new smoking now.
Yeah, that's right.
So you want to make sure, hey, if you're especially a desk jockey, try to set an alarm where once an hour you just get up and walk around. Yeah. The other thing too is, you could just do some simple mobility stuff, whether it's putting 2 tennis balls in an old sock, tying it off, and just working around your thoracic spine. So that's where all the ribs are attaching. Mm-hmm. So not your low back and not your cervical with the neck, but just in between. And you should be able to lie on that tennis ball, and have your spine in between the 2 balls. And that should be, not extremely uncomfortable, but it should be okay. And if not, that tells you how tense those back muscles are from the sitting posture. And then that just makes whatever shoulder problems you have worse, because you're almost locked in that position. So sometimes people need to realize muscles can't only be locked short, but they can be locked long as well. And that's sometimes what happens in that upper mid back is you get locked in these long positions while the front of your chest gets locked in a shorter position from sitting. And so sometimes you got to break them up with different strategies, whether it's stretching or even strengthening. So maybe you're getting on the TRX and you're doing some rows to help get those muscles a little bit unlocked and getting back to contracted where they should be.
Mm-hmm. Great. And by the way, I'm standing while we're doing this interview.
There we go.
Just to let everybody know. Yeah.
Me too. I'm walking around too. I can't sit still when I do these things. So I'm walking around this room like a caged tiger. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how I have to do it. And I built sort of a makeshift standing desk that I use maybe a couple hours a day at least, so I'm not just sitting constantly all day, which I think helps as well. But
oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and now this is something that I think a lot of people are interested in. So how can a triathlete maximize their workouts, whether it's swimming or just in general, just triathlon? It requires so many different things that you have to be doing. And then we add in strength training. It's like there's another thing. And, we all have busy schedules. What are your ideas in terms of how to, kind of maximize through strength training and through any other methods that you have of being the most efficient that you can possibly be?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. Whenever time is the most precious commodity. So if you do have a busy schedule, which is family job, and you don't have the luxury of, training whenever you want or however long you want, I would always trade intensity over the volume then. So we can make up for missed volume because you don't have as much time by raising the intensity of your training sessions. So whether we're going harder in the pool, on the bike, or running, or in the weight room, you're lifting heavier as long as you have good technique and keeping the rep ranges down. When you do that, you don't have to do as much volume in the weight room, and you're not going to be as tired for those other sessions. Because I think that's the biggest, argument triathletes will have is, well, I don't want to get myself killed in the gym, and then I'm going to be useless on the bike, right? Or I'm going to be, awful in the pool. So you got to make sure that the strength training is a complement and it doesn't turn into the main focus. And I think a lot of, strength programs or strength coaches even know how to do that. But when it's other coaches who kind of know about strength training a little bit, or they know they should do it, it's harder for them to program that to make sure that that's not the main focus. And so it's very easy to get yourself too tired, too sore, and then you're not able to go on the bikes. The other thing is, whatever your weakest event is, and for most triathletes, it's probably swimming, make sure that you have some buffers around some focus sessions in the week. So maybe one or two kind of sessions that you want, hey, I really want to nail this, whether it's in the swim or you want to nail a good bike session, and make sure the strength training isn't directly in front of that to get you tired. Maybe do that on the back end of the session, whether it's the next day or maybe after you've gone your hard session on the bike. So have a few sessions in mind that you want to protect. But then the other stuff you just have to put in there. And, it can't be the priority. Everything can't be the priority in a week, especially when you're condensed for time. So just kind of prioritizing that, I think, is a big thing that, and oftentimes that's where a coach comes in and helps and kind of identify that for you. But the biggest thing with triathletes, I think, is that they either go too hard in the gym and then they suffer the consequence, or they don't go at all and then they're not getting as strong and then they don't see the results out, on the run, bike, swim.
Yeah, so is there timing? Like, do you recommend any kind of timing to do strength training? Like, it should be in the morning or before you swim or after you do whatever. Is that something? Or
in person, when I have people come, I have a lot of triathletes that come to see me in person, actually, and we'll do a strength training session, and then afterwards they're going to go do an easy run. So one of their easy runs, they're going to just back half right at the end of the strength training, whether it's a 5 or 7 mile just easy run for the day. That's where they're going to fit it in, and it works out perfect. With the swimming, I'd always prefer to do strength training before if you're going to do them back to back. But if you're going to do that, then know that the swimming session is probably not going to be like your best aerobic effort or sprint effort. So if it's more an easy swim session, do that. If your swimming, again, is more the focus session, I do the swimming first and then do the weight training after. But The weight training is such a high intensity, or it should be, that I'd always prioritize that with the other sessions that you're doing that day, unless it goes back to, hey, this is my number 1 or number 2 priority session for the week. And that's where you have to start protecting those.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, another thing that comes up a lot since I've been coaching is people come up to me and they're like, I feel really weak in the water. I need to start doing strength training. I feel like my triceps are just not, they're not strong enough to push me through the water. And meanwhile, their technique is just atrocious. Like they're not efficient at all in the water. So I tell them, don't start going to the gym and doing all these tricep pull downs. That's not going to help you. So, but what would you say about beginners? Should they start doing strength training immediately, or work on technique first, or do both, or what?
Remember, the biggest factor in swimming performance is drag. So if you can reduce drag, you're going to get faster, right? And you can never get so strong that you're going to overcome all drag. So that kind of goes back to that. If you have an awful catch and you have awful technique, you're never going to get strong enough to overcome those things. Those are always going to be your limiting factor. So yes, the technique is crucial, and that's where most of the beginner swimmers are going to make up easy time, is just by, hey, making sure your elbow's higher on that catch underwater, that you're actually being strong and pulling through that catch. But at the same time, I wouldn't discount what getting a little bit stronger would do for that catch as well. And you have to think, when you're going through the water, are you going through the water as a kayak or as a rubber raft? And you can tell which one's going to go farther with just one little push. Mm-hmm. So that's where in the gym, if you're getting your core a lot stronger and learning to kind of swim from your inside out and being strong from the middle and connect to your catch, then as you improve your technique, you're just going to see it compound in terms of getting better and better and better. So I wouldn't necessarily look at it as an either or thing. I do both, but know that you're never going to get so strong you can overcome bad technique. The drag factor in swimming is always going to be the biggest factor. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're that kayak going through the water and not, jelly in the middle and rubber raft, because that's going to be a lot more work to overcome as well.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. What about yoga? Do you have any opinions on yoga?
I think yoga is a great tool if it's implemented for you and if it's appropriate for you. I think a lot of times women don't need to be any more flexible. They need to be strong. And guys oftentimes are pretty strong, but they need more flexibility. And so often, in the yoga class, what is it? Usually all females. And in the weight room, it's all guys, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you got to flip that a little bit.
Yeah.
But two, it goes back to kind of like that hamstring idea we were talking about earlier. Forcing a range of motion in the body that it's not ready for, you got to ask, why is this tight? And I think sometimes in a class setting, that's a little bit harder to go through. And so you just have to be careful and kind of know your body at least and say, okay, well, why are my hamstrings tight? And am I going to maybe put myself in a bad position by trying to be real aggressive in the stretching? I have two rules about stretching. You got to be able to breathe and you got to be able to smile. Two simple rules. And if you can't do those two, you have to ask yourself, is this stretch really doing me any good? Or am I actually producing more harm because of it? So the body is always trying to protect itself, and it's trying to make sure it's preserving itself. So if a muscle's ever tight, you got to ask, why is it tight? And that's where, again, going through the assessment and, when we coach the athletes, that's how we can start to unpeel these layers and actually get to the root problem there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I offer this yoga training in my membership course in TriSwim Pro, and it starts off with really, really, really basic movements, not even stretches at the beginning, but just movements. And
that's
and
good.
Sort of builds on that, and it's all about breathing and being mindful and all that. So that's totally I totally agree with that as well. I saw something on your website. You talked about bilateral breathing. And what is your take on that? It's always a question that comes up, and I think I have like 8 articles on my website about it. So it's obviously a popular topic. Bilateral breathing, meaning breathing every 3 or 5 strokes.
So especially as a distance swimmer, I feel like I could talk about this a lot, because I put in the most laps of most people in terms of how many yards we're doing. But I would say overall, you always want to be balanced versus not if you have a choice, right? So in the water, if you can swim with breathing every 3 or every 5 strokes in training, that's always going to be the preferred method just because everything is more balanced. You'd be amazed at how quickly you'll start to favor one side if you're always breathing to one side. And especially too, when you're breathing to that side, so let's say you're breathing to your right while you're pulling with your left, how quickly you drop that left elbow and lose some of that catch. And so now your left arm is almost turning into half a stroke. You're not even really pulling with that, because if your head's not back in position by the time you're ready for that catch, well, you essentially lost half of that catch. So I think the balance helps you make sure you're eliminating that as much as possible. I think in the last couple of years, that front-mounted snorkel is awesome, because then it takes breathing all out of the equation. You could just put the front-mounted snorkel on and swim and not have to worry about your breathing, and then you could actually just focus on your stroke. And then even if you have the front-mounted snorkel on, you can even practice breathing to one side and making it quicker than you normally do, because you don't actually have to breathe. A lot of times people just breathe so slow and so late, and this, it gets up into their strokes and then just starts causing all kinds of problems. So I think the front-mounted snorkel is a great tool to help people. If they really hate bilateral breathing, just put on the snorkel. And then if you want to, race breathing to one side, I think that's fine in the race. But on a whole day after day training, I think it's better if you breathe side to side or just throw on the snorkel if you don't even want to worry about it.
That's a great idea. I actually haven't done that. I do love the snorkel, and having them breathe with the snorkel is it sort of gets you used to that position in the water. And I think that would be really helpful. Yeah,
we call that fake breathing. So then you could, try to go as quick as you can and really overspeed the breath so that your head is back in position by the time you're going through that catch. And then you can actually, get the most of every single stroke, because, as soon as you're breathing, you're losing some of that pull because you're not in as good a position. And especially if you're breathing late, good luck.
What happens if people just breathe to one side? Have you seen shoulder issues from that, or?
Yeah, I think that goes back to kind of like how you entered the process. So if you're pretty good and your shoulders move pretty good, you might be able to get away with it, and it might not be a big deal. But I think another telling sign is if you could just look at your shoulders in the mirror. If one is lower than the other by a few inches, that's a telltale sign for any swimmer. Oh yeah, you breathe to one side, right?
Yeah.
You're always stronger and pulling on one side. So I think over time, asymmetries can catch up to you, and they always put you a little bit behind the 8 ball. So I would always rather try to eliminate those as much as possible. But I think asymmetries are part of life, but I just want to eliminate them as much as I can if I have a choice.
Right.
If I have a choice of breathing every side or both sides, I would always rather choose the balanced side of that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I pretty much breathe only on my right side for most of my life until I started having shoulder issues, and then I was like, okay, I better learn how to do this bilateral thing. And it turns out it's learnable, and it actually helps in a lot of ways, especially like open water swimming and then sort of balancing out a little bit. But you're right. I mean, it comes down to, it is an individual thing. Like someone could breathe on one side for 70 years and be fine, but other people are going to have all kinds of problems. And I had a friend that I used to swim masters with, and he had the thing that I'm sure you've seen before, where he would reach in really far on one side, like his left arm would go really far on the inside and then pull out.
Oh, yeah.
I would tell him, like, yeah, you need to move that arm out. And I'm like, and he's like in his 30s, and I'm going, have you ever had any shoulder problems? No, never any problems with that shoulder. I'm like, wow, that is amazing, because I had so many problems and I had pretty good technique. So
yeah, it kind of goes back to like how we do with elite swimming, especially too, is we look at the freaks, the fastest people in the world, and we say, oh, they do it that way, we should do it that way.
Yeah.
And just because they're doing it that way, I mean, they're freaks. That's why they're super fast. So you shouldn't necessarily copy everything they're doing. They're doing it usually in spite of mistakes or in spite of ways that you could be able to do it. So yeah, just because it works for somebody doesn't mean, it's universal.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you said that, I was thinking of the whole, people would talk about the overarm recovery, and then inevitably, it used to be always, oh, well, Janet Evans has this windmill stroke, and so that's what, and it's like, so you should learn how to do that, and it's like, I can't, that's, again, it's like she learned that, and she definitely perfected that pretty well, but that doesn't mean that everyone should learn that, especially someone that's a triathlete that's not doing you're not swimming pool races, you're not trying to win a gold medal, you're not, I mean, this is just for triathlon, so it's like, anyway, I'm sure you agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, there's like key principles, I think, in every stroke, and most of them include a high elbow catch, right?
Yeah.
And if you have that, I almost don't even care what the other stuff looks like, because if you have a great catch, probably everything else we can kind of work around. But if you don't have a good catch, I don't really care what the rest of your stroke looks like. You're not going to do as well as you could. So I think, that's kind of like a never-changing principle of the catch. And the rest of the stuff, the recovery, even head position a little bit, I think, is debatable. Some elite swimmers, look a little bit more forward than others, but they all have a great catch. Right. And I think if you got that, and then body position, I'd probably throw that in too. If you have body position, catch. Everything else, I think, is a little bit more individualized.
Yeah. I think the best example of a catch that I saw was that Sun Yang, the Chinese distance swimmer. It was like, gosh, it's got like the perfect stroke. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a robot, like just it's like it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I'll try to include the video. There's a video that has him swimming, and it's like everything's underwater, and there's some slow motion shots, and it's really amazing. Yeah. So let's talk about your website, your Ritter Sport, and your business there. It's rittersportsp.com, right?
Yeah, Ritter SP. Yeah, rittersp.com.
Ritter SP, sorry.
Yeah, we've been in business for going on 5 years coming up here. So we have 3 online coaches, and then we also have a dietitian, and then another coach that I have that trains at one of my other locations in Charlotte. But we have clients now all over the world that we're training, and mainly it's triathletes and swimmers. Mm-hmm. And we are experts in how do we incorporate that strength training into your overall plan so that it isn't the focus. Yeah. We're not killing you in the gym, but we're getting you stronger so that then you can go see results. And I just got 2 quick examples. One is a triathlete, young triathlete, mid-20s, and she came to us last April coming off a stress fracture, from too much running, not being strong enough, and she was really nervous because she had Ironman Maryland coming up in September, and she's like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. We just did 2 30-minute weight training sessions a week, and slowly over time just progressed her, and she got 6th place overall, killed her time, and was just totally shocked because coming off the injury, she had no expectations, right? She wasn't even sure she should enter and do the race, but because we were able to do focused strength training, it was able to work. And then probably my best master swimming example so far, there's a video of him on the website as well. Bruce, he came off a surgery and, just wasn't even sure if he was going to swim, a lot of shoulder and other injuries going on. And we took him over 2.5 years from not even being able to do a hinge. You asked what a hinge is. He couldn't even do a hinge well, to he was deadlifting over 300 pounds. He was doing pull-ups with 60 pounds around his waist at age 58, mind you. Mm-hmm. And at age 58, he swam faster than he did when he was in high school. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
So, that's the kind of stuff. And all we did was the specific strength training, and we worked around whatever other programs these athletes were doing. And so we're kind of the best at integrating and not taking over your program. And so, if you sign up for the newsletter, you can get a pull-up progression. So how to go from 0 pull-ups to actually doing some. We've kind of broken that down for you. And then there's the ebook, you could dive into that, or even contact us if you want to look into further training. But yeah, we just love helping people, and especially just, seeing the gains that they can make with strength training, just adding to the program. I really think it's a lot of people's secret weapon.
Yeah, that sounds really awesome. How do you work with people remotely? Is it Skype, or do you have a program that you give them? Or
it's a pretty robust process, and sometimes if you don't make it through the process, I feel like it won't go over the long haul. So it has to be a commitment on the client at the other end as well. So we take them through the same assessment we do in person. They watch a video on our website after they fill out the initial assessment form. We send them a link to the video site, and they'll watch the assessment, and they either film themselves doing the same assessment, send it back to us so we can assess them just like we were in person, or they can do kind of a self-score. If they have a real problem, shoot video back to us. They can kind of self-score, say, okay, yeah, I'm about this based off of the video, and I'm about that. And then from there, we'll set up an initial call, whether it's, FaceTime, Skype, or just on the phone, talk about their goals, talk about the program. And then from there, it's email communication back and forth. It's, getting on the video calls if we need to. And then also, too, them emailing us back technique videos of them actually doing lifts in the weight room, maybe that we need to work on. Maybe they never hinged before. We need to make sure that technique is good. And just communication back and forth. And honestly, a lot of these people are already driven and already doing weight training. We just make sure they're doing the right things and not just getting tired, but actually getting better. So most of our clients are not just sitting on the couch and wake up and say, oh, I want to train with someone online. They're already doing something out there. They just want to make sure what they're doing is actually worthwhile.
Right. Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that's about it. I'm really impressed with what you're doing, Chris, and it's been awesome having you on the show. Thanks again for coming on and sharing all of your knowledge with us. And again, your website, rittersp.com, if anyone wants to get in touch and take advantage and download the ebook, it's all there.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode covering swimming and triathlon mastery. To get your free online swim clinic, just go to tryswimlessons.com. Give us your name and email, and we'll have session number 1 off to you right away. Begin your process of befriending the swim and laughing at the water now.